Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning into another Super Tees video. And Blizzard just announced their Arena World Championship program for the beginnings of the War Within. And I wanted to construct a tier list to start discussing which specializations are likely going to be performing the best in this tournament, what type of meta I'm trying to predict for Season 1 in terms of 3v3. So a lot of these specializations and compositions are likely going to also be transferable to the ladder in order to find success, and that's going to be the main points of discussion for today's video. So let's get started. We got a lot of specs to talk about. Now, Affliction Warlock is looking like a remarkably powerful specialization when it comes to offense. It is doing some of the highest damage of any specialization currently in the game. A lot of players are really positively receiving the changes to it and the hero talent adaptations for it as well. Seems to be like a lot of people are playing it, but how good is it actually, right? I think that it does come with some weaknesses, and some of those weaknesses are that when multiple melee get on you, it can be very difficult to survive, but I'm not necessarily anticipating a super heavy melee meta unless we see some very unique compositions coming out. So for me, Affliction, I think that it could likely do pretty decently. I'm really thinking like Rogue Lock or Mage Lock, or possibly something really weird, which is like Feral Lock. I actually think Feral Druid, when we get to it, I think a lot is going to pivot around rogues and ferals, likely, at least in this initial meta, given the current balance. This is taking into account the nerfs that just came in from last week as well. But I could definitely see it coming in towards the top, kind of like as a counter pick into casters, or a counter pick into melee when paired with like a Frost Mage or something like that. But I'm not sold on it 100% being like it's going to win everything tournament setting range DPS. Arcane, on the other hand, could definitely. I think that Rogue Mage, whether it's subtlety or assassination, is still kind of yet to be seen. It really depends on how much time players have to adapt to the new meta. I could see assassination being better as players get better at the game, whereas subtlety, when players aren't sure when the burst is coming or where it's coming from, usually has a bit of an edge. But I definitely see Arcane having a huge amount of potential. It just has really good survivability. I'm thinking like, in the past when we saw in Dragonflight, Cubsy on the Arcane Mage was still making it work, even though everybody else had re-rolled to Boomkin. He was still getting like top 4 finishes. I think Arcane is still just as strong, and the other specs like Boomkin and Industrial Lock are a lot weaker. So for me, Arcane is probably going to be like an S tier in terms of performer for the first tournament. Arms Warrior, I don't think it's going to be seen too much. I think in comparison to Fury, it's going to lack a bit of the gas. I think it's better into double melee, so it might come out as like a situational counter picking specialization. But I think it's probably going to fall pretty flat, mostly because it's going to struggle very heavily with mages. It's going to struggle very heavily with hunters. It's going to struggle very heavily with Feral Druids likely as well. And I think all of these are likely going to be represented. Also, the specs that it typically synergizes with, I don't think are performing necessarily at the top. So I've got Arms Warrior a bit lower at the moment. Assassination Rogue is definitely a specialization that could do well. Obviously I'm thinking about, in Europe at least, teams like Echo, if they can get a good assassination Arcane. We saw them rip that out in the last tournament in Dragonflight, and it looks really good even moving into this patch in terms of like how much power it really has as a composition. So I definitely think Assassination is going to have some remarkable potential in the tournament. Balanced Druid, I'm a bit worried about its survivability, particularly against things like Assassination Rogues and Feral Druids. I think the survivability is like the main culprit for possibly being a liability. It still does have Cyclone, but our stats are also squished. For me, I think Boomkin definitely has an opportunity to do well. And it's going to be a debate. The best part about this tournament is that I think the classes are actually so close to each other that it's really tough to call. Normally the start of an expansion, it's a lot of just like one shots and things are really obviously the best, and it's tough to make a list or it's easy to make a list like this, I should say. But right now it's actually pretty tough. So I think its baseline kit is still strong enough, but survivability is low, and depending on if like these bleed classes end up being as strong as they are right now, of course there's still a couple weeks for the tournament start. Likely we'll update this list as things go on, but as it stands right now, I think survivability could hold it back. BM Hunter, I think there's likely like a 0% chance we see this. I've played against one, I think, this entire time. I've only seen it once, like even on other people's streams. Like I'm tuning into the rank 1 tournament competitor streams every morning basically and seeing what's going on with them and keeping up to date and tabs on them. And BM Hunter just seems like it's not there. It's got like okay damage from the one time that I've seen it, but I don't think it's going to compete with Survival or Hunter at the moment. Blood DK, I really think it's unlikely that we see tank specs. Although, I mean, there's one player in EU that signs up every once in a while that plays all of the tank specs in PvP, and like maybe he actually plays Brewmaster or something like that. But I think it's probably likely coming in at the bottom. Demonology, this is a tough one because it actually is pretty strong. The main problem is that you just get hard countered by AoE roots. So any sort of class is AoE CC, your pets get CC'd, and then that's it. You're kind of done. Your run is kind of over at that point. Survivability is honestly, I think, a bit better than Demo, or better than Destro, or better than Affliction. You do have a bit more setup potential. The few times that we've seen this spec in tournament, it's usually like Boomkin Demo, and it's like those specs are like outliers in terms of their overall damage. I don't think that they're that much of outliers at the moment. Or Demo Frost. And Demo Frost has been really good into double melee, which I'm also not really anticipating. I think it's gonna be like Feral Mage, Rogue Mage, maybe Feral Lock or Rogue Lock. Kind of cycling between those is kind of like the best options. So it's probably gonna feel, maybe we see it pop up like the Demo mains that always play it in tournaments, but I'm not sure if I see it going really far outside of those like counter situations. Destro Lock, I honestly don't see doing very well. I just think its survivability is even lower than AF. Do I think it's as low likelihood as ARMS? Again, I think there's going to be a lot of casters. There's going to be a lot of experimentation. This is, again, a prediction on where these things could land and perform in the tournament. But Destro, I just don't see it having the punch, man. Like, Ice Lance hits as harder than Chaos Bolt. It's instant. You can run the instant cast build, but then it's like you may as well be playing Affliction at that point. I think it's probably like very mid or even possibly C, but we'll leave it there for now. Devastation is super sleeper. This is a really tough one to actually rank because I swear its damage output is really high right now, especially its like lethality. I could see this creeping in. There's a couple of European teams. There was Nethy's team that were in the cup stages as like Feral Devastation, and that was in Dragonflight when this comp was kind of just like, I could see that comp actually being really good now. So Devastation Evoker, like it's either A or S. I might jump this one up a bit as we move through. Again, if I put the spec on the left of the tier, it means I think it's the best on that row. And then obviously a row above is a cut above where that is. Discipline Priest, really solid pick right now. It just got really good output, it seems like. And again, I think like Rogue Mage could likely be playing with Discipline Priest. It seems like its mana isn't as big of an issue. Although, again, a lot of the gameplay that I'm observing is solo shuffle, which is faster dampening. So maybe it does have those problems when we get into rank 3v3. But I think it's probably likely going to come and feel it about like an A tier level. I think it's really good with the Feral caster, rogue caster disc, that type of situation. I think it's going to feel really good in those situations. Ellie, Ellie is predominantly only played in Europe. North America, for some reason, doesn't play it almost ever. Like even in the final season of Dragonflight, we had like multiple Ellie teams in Europe and 0 in NA. NA has the one Shadow Priest. There's like a distinct difference between the regions. So my experience with Ellie has been like it's not that great in Arena. Its survivability is okay. But in Europe, maybe the best Ellies could definitely make it work. But for me, I think Ellie is honestly coming in kind of mid. Maybe it's better than Destro and Demo, but I feel like it's kind of mid at the moment when it comes to 3v3. And this could be just because I'm playing on NA and I haven't seen a lot of it. But I don't, again, maybe like Rogue Ellie. I think that's like the combo. It's like trying to figure out what goes the best with a Rogue or possibly a Feral. And I think those are the combos that we're trying to think. And I think like maybe these ones go better. Enhancement Shaman, I don't think we're going to see it. The buffs definitely helped. I think on ladder, Enhanced can be a lot better. I literally just spam played with Big Dam, who was playing Enhanced Shaman yesterday for like, I don't even know how many skirmishes. It was like at least like 40 in a row of like healer 3v3 skirmishes. And we lost one game that was really close. And we're playing Boomkin Enhanced Shaman. Enhanced is definitely a lot better, but I don't know if it's tournament viable. These specs just get exploited really heavily by mages. And I think Mage is likely going to be pretty popular. So I think it might be tough for them specifically to do well in that setting. Feral Druid might come as a surprise, but I'm actually putting it on S tier. I could see a world where Feral is actually better than Assassination. It's really tanky. And that's like the number one thing that stands out to me for a spec being like really strong at the top end of Arena is like its survivability. Feral's survivability is so much higher than it was before, and its damage is really good, and it has Cyclone. So I think Feral Druid is definitely a spec that people need to seriously consider preparing, whether they play it or to play against it. And anybody that does end up having it, I think is going to do really well. Fire Mage, I don't think is going to be probably played too much. I don't know if I want to put it too low because I feel like putting it down this low, like some people have been playing Fire Mage for years in tournaments, right? Like we had the Shadowlands meta for a long time, even parts of Dragonflight. Fire has just been like the dominant mage spec for so long in tournaments that people might play it just out of pure experience. But I think out of actual value, Arcane and Frost get way more. So I'm going to put Fire down here on C tier for right now. I think its survivability is too low. Hunters are viable. Ferals are viable. I think there's just likely going to be better options. Frost, on the other hand, I think is still S tier. I think the instant cast damage from it is still really good. It's going to synergize really well with Feral Druids, really well with Rogues. Can also do like the double caster thing and a double melee. So I think having like a Frost Mage, Arcane Mage, kind of like Flexer that can play with Feral Rogue is going to be really good. A really solid pick. Frost Death Knight, you know, it depends on if we see Zeke in NA because he's the only one that really played it. I could see Devastation Frost like creeping its head up. I think it's got a lot of potential in terms of like its burst damage. So maybe I'm going to put Frost DK a little higher than Enhance and Warrior because I think the Devastation Frost DK Dev combo, one shot combo can still be really viable. And likely actually is probably good. And Frost DK is reasonably tanky. So its survivability is still pretty high. Fury Warrior. Now, this is where things get tough, right? Because Fury Warrior in BGs and like the random queuing sessions that we're seeing right now looks really good. But I think it gets exploited really hard by things like Rogues and Mages and Hunters. And those are like some of the best specs in the game. So this might come as a bit of a surprise. I think Fury Warrior in like a tournament setting could actually only come in at A and not necessarily be like the best melee in the game. Again, tank specs I'm not really expecting to see. Havoc Demon Hunter I think is not great. Honestly, I think Havoc Demon Hunter is kind of mid at best. Survivability seems kind of low. It gets exploited really badly by Rogues, and Rogues look really good right now. That's like the number one counter for it. I'm trying to think if like a DK Demon Hunter meta could at all pop up. Like, is it tanky enough to actually survive and run down these mage comps? Because that has been like historically the tournament comp is Demon Hunter Death Knight. Or Boomkin Demon Hunter. I think Boomkin Demon Hunter is going to be too fragile. I think these Rogues, Mage, and even Rogue Shadow Priest type of comps are probably going to deal with it too easily. So for me, I think it's maybe a bit better than Enhance and Warrior, but not by much. So put it on to B tier for now. Holy Priest. I think I might have given Holy Priest too bad of a rap. I don't know if it's like, you know, down here on a few of my other tier lists that I've given it now that I've seen it a couple times. And in tournament setting, because it has instant CC, it can actually be really good. So the Holy Priest can CC one target, the Rogue Kidney Shots one, and the Mage Sheep's another, and you get triple CC, which can be really good. So like within the realm of just that, it's kind of disc versus holy as to like who's going to be the Rogue Mage healer, or the Feral Mage healer, or the Jungle healer possibly. So for me, I'm going to put it on B tier. Right now I think disc is a little bit better, but I could see a world where the CC ends up being more valuable than the damage. Holy Paladin, it's not that great. I actually queued in his Boomkin with a Holy Paladin when we were doing our skirmishes yesterday, but I think in comparison to the other healers, it's just really exploitable, whether you go after it or you can CC it really easily. I'm not sure if it's like the best in this meta. It's kind of feeling like Prez Evoker is just kind of dwarfing out every other healer in terms of overall throughput, but even just mechanically, although maybe it could struggle with Arcane. Paladin is typically really good when it's a Hunter meta, and I mean Hunters are good, like they are actually really good, so maybe it comes in as like a counter pick, and maybe just because of the fact that it could come in as a counter pick, I might give it a higher ranking than C. Like I want to put it down here, but I could see it being a counter pick, so it's like it's going to be bad in most of the comps, but fight like some sort of Hunter comp, Paladin might be able to make its debut, but I'm going to put it a bit lower for now. Marksmanship Hunter, really good. I think Jungle Cleave is also like, we talk about like the Rogue Mage, the Feral Mage, but I think also Jungle is really good. It could be very powerful. I'm going to put it here on A tier for now. Mostly just because it's the few Hunters that I've actually seen, like they're tankier now, but at the highest level of coordinated 3v3 play, even with all the healing cooldowns that they got now, seems like they're still pretty easily dismantled. In terms of just damage and raw output, but Jungle is really a comp to look out for. I think like Prez Jungle is honestly maybe the comp to play in the tournament as a whole, whether you know be able to flex between marksman and survival in situations where MM feels weaker, but if I was going into the tournaments, I would want to be playing Preservation, Feral Druid, Hunter. I think it's just remarkably good. Mistweaver, I don't think it's going to be great in 3v3 tournament format. It might be like a counter picking spec where you play Fistweaver into like some sort of dot casters, but I'm not really expecting like Shadow Priest Warlock in tournament. I mean, maybe, but it would be like Shadow Demos to try and counter the rogues. I feel like the rogue, like Assassination Rogues would still just kind of run them over. I'm going to go like, I kind of want to say it's like the worst option. I'm going to put it as the worst option for now, actually. I think it might have a very niche counter situation in 3v3, but at the highest level of play, right, which is this is like tournament format, highest level of play, when you're playing the absolute best on the specs, I think Mistweaver is probably going to fall behind in 3v3. Outlaw Rogue, on the other hand, I think is still really good. I don't know if I want to put it as like, again, because Outlaw has been so good for so long in tournament meta, some rogues may be reluctant to even switch off of it. But I do think Assassin and Sub can more than compete, if not probably better. People might still pick it just because it's safer, it's tankier. I'm going to put it up here onto A tier for now. I think it's actually probably above Fury Warrior at the highest level 3v3. But I really think like Assassin and Sub are definitely slept on. Prez is easy. We don't even really need to think about it too much. Just insane raw throughput on every single aspect of it. I think it in jungle is going to be an insane amount of damage, but even like rogue mage with Prez is probably going to be ridiculous. Probably not going to see any tanks, although maybe, but probably not. Resto Shaman I think is a decent pick. I'm going to put it up here for now. It's kind of likely still just going to feel kind of inferior to Prez, but it could compete with all the other healers. I think having the ability to move enemies around with Static Field Totem, and we saw that with like Lone Tar and EU on the Resto Shaman. Like I think a couple teams will probably still use it, and those are like the clutch abilities that'll enable it to make plays like that. Also, the lower cooldowns on all of its strong cooldowns with the reworks to Resto Shaman, I think puts it in a solid position to have a lot of potential. Resto Druid's a tough one because I've actually seen, I don't want to say that this isn't going to be good because it typically is, but it seems like they're struggling with like the Evokers. Like Devastation's so strong and Prez is so strong, and you get against those classes and you get purged, and it just seems like unrecoverable. Also Shaman being decent and Priest with Purge as healers, I think is making it a bit tougher for Resto Druid specifically. It's definitely still A tier though. I think it may be the worst of the A tier, but I think it's still at least A tier. Ret Paladin's probably going to be pretty mid. I don't see it doing like, it seems really easy to control. Maybe there's some like Ret Warrior comp that can deal with jungle possibly or something like that. But Ret I think is probably going to feel kind of mid. Probably better than Frost DK on average, but it's probably going to feel pretty mid. I think its ability to do range damage and its support for its team is better than Enhancer Ret right now, which puts it a bit higher. Also, its synergy with other specs historically has been a little bit better. So it's going to the B instead of C. Shadow is definitely really sleeper. I could see Shadow as like a strong competitor for the Hunter spot with the Rogue or the Mage spot with the Rogue, mostly just because of how tanky it is and the instant CC that it has. Again, Shadow is just a spec where not a lot of tournament level players have invested a lot of time into it. But I believe Prev's team is coming back, and I feel like their team is going to be the team to like look out for in terms of like what is looking the best in terms of synergizing with the Rogues or the Ferals, right? Now this is a tough ranking though. Do I want to put it on S? I'm going to take a risk here. I'm going to put it on S right now. I actually think that it's probably likely the safest synergy pick with a Rogue or a Feral. Subtlety Rogue, I'm going to put up onto S tier for now. I think Assassin might be a little bit safer overall, but Subtlety's burst, if you get, pair this up with a really good Arcane Mage or something like that, maybe even possibly Hunter, but I'm a little reluctant to that. I think most people in tournament don't pick it because when players are using add-ons and they understand where the damage is coming from, it can become like, all right, we know what our rotation is. And if you get into this infinite loop of like Subtlety can't really penetrate through that, whereas Assassination can sometimes just overpower someone with raw damage and dampening. So I think Assassination is likely to be a little bit better. But definitely not going to take it off the table in terms of options. Survival Hunter, I think, is actually super sleeper. I'm going to put it here probably like in and around with Fury Warrior. I think like Survival Jungle, flex between Survival and Marksman Jungle, maybe even Rogue Hunter could be really good options. Possibly Boomkin Hunter pops up as well. We saw that a couple times in Dragonfly. I could see it making a little bit of a resurgence, but maybe a little less likely. But it's definitely very sleeper. Unholy DK, this is another one that's really hard because like look how many S tier specs there are already. Like I think Unholy DK is actually really good. It's really tanky. I think with this one, it's like, what melee DPS are you going to go with? I like Feral DK for some reason. I could see actually being really gnarly. I'm really hoping somebody tries that, but that comp has like not been good, like hardly ever in the history of the game. But I could see Feral Death Knight just rampaging a mage over with, because it gets such good uptime and they're both so durable and tanky and they have such good disruption. I could see like that type of melee cleave actually doing really well right now. So if you're like thinking of like a melee cleave comp for the ladder or something, like Unholy DK Feral would be the comp that I would want to try. I think that those specs are like strongest damage output, strongest tankiness output, and they have like good synergy with each other. There's MS in the comp. I'm gonna put it like best of A tier for now. Again, this could just be like flipping around, like maybe Fury Warrior hard counters DK, and then you just put a plug of Warrior in to beat the DK, but then the DK beats everything else. And to be honest, the fact that I'm struggling so hard to make this list means that this tournament's likely going to be really awesome. This is honestly, I think, like one of the best starting like overall metas a game can have. I really like it when it's like I'm struggling to like solve it. Vengeance, probably not going to see. Windwalker is another super sleeper melee DPS. The fact that their images can't be rooted anymore took away their major weakness that Warrior and Enhance have, where they can just put their images on a mage and they can attack something else and do full damage to the mage. I've died literally just to the images on my mage against a Windwalker. It is still really tanky. I think it could struggle with like Subtlety Rogue specifically. But outside of that, I think it's really tanky, really tough to take down, has good overall damage output. And with the changes to the images, it doesn't have the problems that Warrior Enhance have. So like Windwalker, I might put up here into A tier. Augmentation, I've not seen a lot of. To me, it seems like Devastation is just better. I don't want to like write Aug off completely, but I'm probably going to put it here kind of like in towards like the bottom of the mid at least, because I don't see it having too much representation, at least from my experience so far on the ladder. Again, my expectation for the meta is like DK Windwalker, Feral DK, possibly these type of comps, maybe Feral Warrior, Unholy DK Warrior, like those are the melee cleaves. The Frost Mage Rogues and Frost Mage Ferals to try and counter those, and then the Hunter Ferals to counter the Mage teams, and then maybe the Shadow Priest Rogues come in as like a, it's decent into everything type of deal, like that. Some of these specs, I think it's just survivability is a little bit lower, and maybe the damage output isn't there 100% in terms of being able to get either connecting to their target, or just the raw numbers aren't there, or their survivability is a little bit too low, or they're a little bit too susceptible to CC in arena situations at like a tournament level, right? Like we're playing at the highest level of the game. But I think I'm pretty confident in this list right now for the tournament gameplay. Hope you guys enjoyed this discussion. It's got you guys thinking, give you some ideas about compositions for yourself to check out and to see how I'm expecting your spec to perform. Again, we're going to constantly update these news posts related to World of Warcraft, so make sure to smash the subscribe button so you don't miss out. Thank you very much for watching the video, and I will see you in the next one.